I call this session of the Public Service Commission to order. Secretary Burgess, are there any changes to the final agenda?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. There's no changes to this morning's agenda.
Thank you. So let's begin with the first item for discussion. Item 201, case 18M0084, which is in the matter of a comprehensive energy efficiency initiative presented by Rudy Stegmuller, Special Assistant for Energy Policy, Peggy Neville, Deputy Director, Office of Clean Energy, and Ted Kelly, Assistant Counsel, are available for questions. Rudy, please begin.
Thank you. Good morning. Before you is an order to accelerate the efficiency targets for utilities. The main basis for the order is a white paper that staff and NYSERDA released in April of this year. Between then and now, 13 public forums have been conducted and 2 rounds of comment. The chief action in this order is to adopt a 31 trillion BTU target for the jurisdictional utilities through 2025. That 31 TBTU is incremental to levels that had already been approved for the utilities as of April when the white paper was released. There are 2 subsidiary targets. The first is a 3% reduction in electricity sales by 2025. The second is a minimum of 5 TBTU of heat pumps. Also, at least 20% of the incremental budget will be dedicated to low and moderate income customers program. The context of the action is a statewide goal of 185 TBTU, which is detailed in the white paper. Most of that 185 TBTU, again, that's through 2025. Most of that is either non-jurisdictional or has already been approved. So this order deals with the increment that the utilities will be expected to contribute to that between now and 2025. The estimated outlay to achieve that is $1.6 billion. The estimated direct bill impacts for non-participating residential customers is 0.6% for electric customers, 0.1% for gas customers. The estimated bill savings for participating customers are in the neighborhood of $15 billion. But that does not count those customers' investments to achieve the savings. The investments, the private investments, those customers make within the efficiency measure. But the bill savings themselves estimated at $15 billion. The process to set these targets is 2 stages. First, in this order, the 2019 and 2020 targets are assigned directly. These are built up from the levels in the ETIP, and then they're adjusted for each utility, because some utilities have already advanced through rate cases, and some less so. So the targets here will put all the utilities roughly on the same track through 2020. And then second, the order sets up a process for utility-specific targets for 2021 to 2025. Utilities in March, not later than the end of March 2019, will jointly file a set of targets and budgets. They'll do this in consultation with NYSERDA. This order contains a set of consumptive targets and budgets through 2025, non-binding, based on a pro rata ramp-up for each utility. The utilities have asked for a chance to reduce costs and refine the program mix by tailoring it to the needs of their own service territory, based on their own potential spending. So this accommodates that request of the utility. The overall target, 31 TBTU, is adopted here, and what the utility filed in March of 2019 can't be less than that. If they don't file something that meets the requirements of this order, then the presumptive targets that are contained in the appendix would go forward by default. Again, only going forward for further comment process. So either way, there will be another round of public scrutiny and comment before the commission acts at some point next year to adopt the 2021 to 2025 targets and budget. So the process is designed to provide for flexibility to achieve the TDPU targets at the lowest cost to ratepayers. Delivered fuel customers will be eligible under certain conditions. Delivered fuel being mostly oil and propane. So you can hear me, I hope. I can barely hear myself.
Could you turn over the schedule for Blackberry to ready for the device before we do this? Did everybody hear that?
No.
You can't hear anything from the banana in your ear? Sorry, we're trying to grapple with the acoustics issue, which I think is apparent to everybody.
Chair, I make a motion that we stand at ease for a moment.
Thank you. Let's do that. All right. Okay, so with that, we're going to believe we've solved the problem, and if it comes back, we think we have a way to fix it. Okay. So with that, we're back in action.
Okay. We ready?
Well, let me ask Secretary Burgess, do we need to repeat the opening remarks, or do we believe that...
I didn't say anything meaningful anyway.
I think it might be helpful just because maybe not everybody heard it.
Okay.
Just to I'm sure it's
Okay.
in the record, but I think
So-
just to be helpful, it'd be good to start from the beginning.
With apologies for the possible redundancy, Rudy, could you begin again, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you want me to just summarize what I said, or do you want just
Go
start?
right from the
Okay, the whole
beginning.
thing. You got it.
Courtesy to our
Okay.
audience.
All right. You have before you an order to accelerate the energy efficiency targets for public utilities. The main basis for the order is a white paper that was released by staff and NYSERDA in April of this year. And during the subsequent to the release of the white paper, there have been 13 public forums and 2 rounds of comment. The chief action in the order is to adopt a target of 31 trillion BTUs of energy efficiency for the jurisdictional utilities through 2025. That target is incremental to levels already approved for the utilities as of April of this year, and it was as of the time when the white paper was released. There are 2 subsidiary targets, a 3% reduction in electric sales by 2025 and a minimum of 5 TBTUs of heat pump savings. Also, at least 20% of the incremental budget will be dedicated to low and moderate income customers. This action is set in the context of a statewide 185 TBTU goal by 2025, which is detailed in the white paper. The majority of those 185 TBTUs are either already in process or attributed to non-jurisdictional entities. So the concern of this order is the increment that the jurisdictional utilities will be expected to achieve through 2025. The estimated outlay to achieve that is $1.6 billion. Estimated direct bill impacts on non-participating residential customers, 0.6% electric, 0.1% gas. The estimated bill savings for participating customers are around $15 billion. That does not count those customers' private investments in the efficiency measures to achieve. The process to set the targets is 2-staged. First, in this order, the 2019 to 2020 targets are assigned directly, targets and budgets. These are built up from the ETIP levels put everybody onto roughly the same track. They're adjusted for each utility because some have advanced farther through rate cases than others have. This, again, this doesn't put them onto exactly equal tracks, but roughly. Second, the order sets up a further process for the utility-specific targets from 2021 to 2025, targets and budgets, sorry. Utilities will jointly file, not later than the end of March of 2019, a set of targets and budgets. And they will do that in consultation with NYSERDA. It's not a joint filing with NYSERDA. The CEF is not part of this order. Excuse me. Excuse me. This order contains a set of presumptive targets and budgets in the appendix. These are not binding. They're not being adopted here. They are based on a pro rata ramp-up for each utility through 2025. The utilities ask for a chance to reduce costs and improve on the overall set of programs by tailoring it to their specific utility territory needs. They will each have their own potential studies to use. So the overall target is adopted here, and the filing the utilities make in 2019 can't be less than that. If they don't file something that meets this order's requirements, then the presumptive targets will be put forward. Either way, there's another round of public scrutiny and comment before it comes back to the Commission at some point in 2019 for approval of the 2021 to 25 targets and budgets. So the process is designed to produce flexibility to achieve the TBTU targets at the lowest cost of ratepayers. Delivered fuel, which is basically mostly oil and propane, customers will be eligible under certain conditions. The delivered fuel programs have to lower overall costs. They have to produce savings of the utility's own product, and they can't involve installation of new oil or propane burning equipment. So the best example of that would be thermal insulation improvements for a customer that heats with oil and has air conditioning. So you're going to save BTUs from electric BTUs in the summer, and you're going to save oil BTUs in the winter, and they would all count towards the statewide target. Okay. So along with, I think now we got to the point where, where I started before. Excuse me. Along with the main action of adopting targets, setting up a process to finalize the targets, there are a number of actions designed to reduce costs and improve implementation. Access to customer data is a major cost driver. This order tackles that issue in several ways. Clarifies the conditions under which utilities contractors can use data provided by utilities. It accelerates the implementation of Green Button Connect or similar, or a product similar to Green Button Connect. Creates a process to develop data access terms and conditions under Green Button Connect. It establishes a standard that once consent has been got, once there is consent from the customer, it should be no more difficult for the developer to get the data than it is for the customer to get their own data. It describes ways to develop windows and opportunities to gain consent from customers. It requires the utilities to prepare for statewide benchmarking and initiates pilots to better identify areas with concentrations of likely customers. So the data issue is not isolated to energy efficiency. It cuts across all distributed resources. And for that reason, the order announces that a separate proceeding will be started on customer data access issues applicable to providers of all types of DER. The chief mission of that proceeding is to maximize the useful access to data while appropriately protecting customer privacy. Other cost reduction opportunities discussed in the order include the use of kickers, which capture locational and time-based values. kickers will be used to supplement program incentives and thereby reduce program cost. Innovative program approaches are encouraged, such as pay for performance. The flexibility to shift targets among fuel types is a cost reduction possibility. And finally, the order sets up a performance improvement process, which is an implementation thing that will be run by staff with the utilities and NYSERDA, essentially to critique program administration and develop best practices. And outreach to market participants will be a major element of that project. Heat pumps have a large potential for cost-effective efficiency. They also serve the state's beneficial electrification policy. The order sets up a subsidiary target of at least 5 TBTUs. This will be done with a statewide uniform program administration in which NYSERDA is expected to play a central role. Where a heat pump replaces an oil or propane furnace, it creates a benefit to electric customers because you have while you're reducing total BTUs, you're increasing electric sales, and so the more sales units across which you can recover the utilities costs, the better off the ratepayers are. So a portion of that benefit will be captured to reduce ratepayer costs for the heat pump incentives themselves. Regarding low and moderate income customers, the order requires that at least 20% of incremental budgets will be dedicated to LMI programs. There's a strong emphasis on improving the coordination of program administration between NYSERDA and the utilities. There were 7 stakeholder forums across the state on LMI issues conducted as part of this proceeding. Just this past Monday, I believe, a summary of those forums was filed. The order requires staff and NYSERDA to issue a report by the end of January next year that on that summary, including recommendations, and that will inform the utilities' deliberations and will inform the utilities filing in March. On the regulatory issues, utilities will continue to recover prudently incurred costs. Typically, that will happen as that will be in the form of operating expenses. It is possible in rate cases that utilities may be allowed to amortize their costs if they can demonstrate that that's in the ratepayers' interests, and that would typically happen in the context of a given rate plan. EAMs, utility incentives, will be used to achieve ratepayer savings. As a general rule, they won't be added on top of program costs. They will be based on shared savings, cost reductions below budgeted levels. They may also be used to encourage utilities to bring forward innovative programs, typically involving third parties, that have the program budget levels themselves have very low costs compared to what has typically been required for that sort of a measure. And finally, rate design. Efficiency expenses have always been recovered through volumetric rates because there is a greater emphasis now on peak reduction benefits of energy efficiency. The order says that in particular rate cases, some costs may be recovered on a demand basis, and that will be a rate case specific decision. So to sum up, utilities will immediately begin to implement their targets for 2019 and 20. The Commission will see a joint filing by the utilities in the March of 2019, which will then go through the SAPA process. The Commission will act again at some point in 2019 to adopt the targets and budgets for the 21 to 25 period. And with that, Peggy's here to answer questions.
So thank you very much. I'm very encouraged that this is coming before us. Energy efficiency is clearly one of the very best resources we can tap into. It delivers bill savings, it delivers energy savings, it delivers carbon savings, and it's consistent with, deeply consistent with, in fact, indispensable to our REV goals of clean, affordable, and reliable. And we know that there's progress to be made. I find that the approach taken here, in a word, is right. I think the stage model makes sense, that we can get going for 19 and 20 immediately, but we can be forethoughtful and planful as as we take on the new for the years 21 and 25. I think it's good that we are integrating this into utility business, into utility, what we expect from them. I certainly like the idea that we are focused on reducing costs and effectively achieving far greater efficiency in our efficiency. I think it's good that we are engaging new resources, data, heat pumps, more innovation from the market. I think it's good that we are focused on performance and improving performance. I see this as a path to do more in a sensible, good for New York way. It's important, it's well thought out, and I'm going to support this. Commissioner Sayre.
I will do this without a microphone. It's often said that the cheapest and the cleanest form of energy is the so-called negawatt, the energy that we don't use because we conserve. This initiative will produce a lot of negawatts. The direct benefit from the negawatts, of course, goes to the customers who use less and save on their bills. But one of the best things about this program as it's been proposed and designed here is that not only do the participants benefit very greatly, but the non-participants will only see a very small increase in their bills, well under 1%, as Rudy said earlier. Indirectly, the benefits are even greater. The benefits to society from not generating and not using energy are enormous. This item will help move New York toward its goals of addressing not only climate change, but also pollution from the generation and use of electricity. I'm very pleased to support the item.
Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions that I hope you can answer. If not, just let me know. One is, this order talks about LMI and looking at next steps for that. Is the intention, when I look at the draft order, it speaks to an expected filing to be made by the utilities on that. Can you speak a little bit about that in particular, what exactly you mean by expected to file, and what that may look like, and whether it comes back to the commission itself?
The implementation plan?
Yep.
Yeah, that's, so because the commission will act again next year, this is really, it's a little unusual to be in an order, but it's sort of a heads up that we expect that the commission will order next time around an implementation plan to be filed within 60 days or something like that. And so that decision will get made next year by the commission, and whether it needs to come back to the commission or not would be decided at that time. And you probably want to take into account how quickly things need to get moving. Whether the time delay of coming back to the commission is going to, how that's going to affect, the outlay of the plan. So, but that's a decision for the commission to make next year.
I'll just add to that, Rudy. I'll just add to that. In the March filing that will be coming in, that the joint utilities will be filing, proposing their budgets and targets. That March filing will also include kind of the general framework for the LMI initiative. And so the idea, the reference to the implementation plan is that the March filing will come in, that will go through a SAPA process. As Rudy mentioned, there'll be an opportunity for public comment on that. After the commission acts for the next time, the sense is that there may be more discrete implementation details that would be better suited for an implementation plan after the clarity of the next order, but you will have a lot more visibility in the March filing about what the LMI proposal will be. So that will be the first viewpoint of where you see the statewide LMI approach being taken, and that will go through a public comment process.
Okay, that's good. So it would go through a common process and then come to the commission. I just do want to flag for folks, we all are very interested in LMI and successful LMI programs and that show sort of verifiable solutions. But I am mindful that, it's, as I sit here, this isn't the first time we've addressed this, and we have looked at the issues fairly robustly, but actually in many different sort of white papers, forums, et cetera. There's the February 2017 report that came out, I think, through the CEAC, and then there's also the white paper that came out, or actually I don't know if it's a white paper, but a summary report of the forums that came out this week. I have not drilled down on that one, but I did look at it fairly quickly among other things, and saw that it matched up a lot of the same issues that had been addressed in the other report. And those are just two. There are others. So, and then we also had the energy affordability program. So what I really want to make sure is that we also carefully look at all of those different reports and filings and try to parse through that in a way that makes sense to get some of the critical issues so that we are identifying what we see as potentially viable, and also some coordination among them, so that I think that would be very helpful, so that we're not sort of doing it all over again and not getting far, because the ultimate goal for me is that we make progress on this issue, rather than just sort of repeating the same thing, and that's important to do. But also to the extent that we expect to file, then that the commission may act on what that is. I don't want to prejudge what it may or may not be and whether or not it's appropriate for an implementation plan on a separate filing, or be looking at it through the way we do with the energy affordability, through the rate proceedings, is something that we need to be mindful of. And also, remember, we had a target with CDG when we first started with the 20%, and there were problems with that. Again, I think there was some reports that came out showcasing some of the barriers and challenges. So my goal really is for us to be making positive incremental changes and taking all of the documents and all of the data that we've gotten and all of the comments from people in a way that starts breaking that down, rather than just repeating. So that's just on the LMI piece of it, so just focus that on you. There is in the draft order mentioned, and you talked about it, Rudy, on the performance management and improvement process, that the staff would be working with the utilities and NYSERDA and looking at that. While I do think that's really a very good idea, I do think that we do need to be mindful that there are performance management and improvement processes that we ourselves may be important for us to consider. I don't want this to be that staff is directing folks to do things a certain way because this is how we think it should be done, to the extent that we facilitate proper management and improvement processes for consideration, but we also may be open to feedback from others on other ways that we can do it. We've done it in the SIR as well as others, and we need to really be looking at it from a thoughtful perspective, and that this shouldn't just be for the sake of doing it, but really making sure that it's working in a way that's helpful to all participants. So I just...
Yeah. Well, just to clarify, and it is designed to be a constructive, proactive, and mostly informal process where it becomes formal if there's a specific critique, a specific recommendation on how to improve a program that seems pretty important that staff has, that a utility is rejecting, staff will file that with the commission, and then the utility will be required to file a response.
Okay.
And then where it goes from there depends on the gravity of it and whether there's
Okay.
an agreement or not. It could
Yeah,
come to the commission, it doesn't have to come to the commission.
I think the idea is a good one, and I am supportive. I just want to be mindful that we remember the intent of this, and not, sometimes we can be a little bit bureaucratic and siloed. So I just want, not saying everybody, but I just want to, and not saying me, but but I do want to be mindful that we do look at that of what the ultimate goal is, because it can be a positive that we are looking at process improvements in that fashion. There is mention in the draft report about the self-direct programs, and to the extent that these were helpful from looking at that. There is a disconnect a little bit in the draft language as it relates to the self-direct programs, because I do believe there's just a petition filed seeking to undo the self-direct program for at least one utility. And I just want to make sure that what that match-up or mismatch is.
Sure, yeah, I can handle that. So in the March 2018 ETIP order, we spoke to the previous requirement that all utilities run a self-direct program for large customers. The utilities have been at that, I think, since 2017 was the beginning of those. Unfortunately, we have not seen a tremendous amount of participation in that for a variety of reasons. So in the March order, the commission required utilities to reassess their self-direct programs, and to the extent that they didn't plan to continue them into 2018, make a filing to let us know that. So that's probably the filing you're referring to. That the fact that large customers haven't participated in the self-direct doesn't mean large customers aren't participating in EE. In some cases, those large customers have found it to be more advantageous to work through their core programs as opposed to the self-direct. So here in this order, we're recognizing that coming out of the gate, the self-direct programs as they were, we didn't get it quite right. It didn't result in the outcomes that we were looking for. So we encourage the utilities to continue to work with this customer class because we believe they're important to helping us obtain our goals. And we reference some pilot programs that NYSERDA has undertaken in the Clean Energy Fund that was trying to test out different models for kind of achieving a similar self-direct type of an approach. So we're trying to kind of match that up and watch to the extent that there's value and opportunity there, that maybe we could integrate that more fully as we move forward with these programs.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. I do want to flag a couple of things before I make some closing remarks, but that MI and UIU's filings really spoke to me. I really found very much, while a lot of the filings were very helpful, both MI and UIU did a very good job of really channeling a lot of the concerns that I have, especially as it relates to how are we going to quantify the savings, and to the extent of what exactly does this mean from a cost perspective, and looking at some of the factors that are important in this evaluation process. UIU in particular talked about beneficial electrification, and while we have an ongoing proceeding looking at some of these issues, I do think we gave a little bit short shrift to UIU and some of their concerns. I think we try to incorporate it, especially because we'll be looking at some other white papers that are coming out, as well as new proceeding, and as well as a number of different next steps. So there will be an opportunity for that. But I do really think that the thing that struck me is there were very few consumer advocates, if any, other than UIU, in this proceeding. And while there were folks who had a particular, and there's a laundry list of things that had a particular interest for their particular customers, which does make up, does weigh heavily on me that we didn't have some other statewide consumer advocates in here. And I want to be mindful that UIU's voice, I think, is many times a lone one, and we need to look at sort of incorporating some of those thoughts in a way that may need to get flushed out. And in particular, one of the concerns I have is that UIU raised, where UIU talks about the system load profiles and large-scale deployment of heat pumps and what that may look like with the penetration levels. And while we talk and showcase based on the data that the shift in the system load profiles is not large at this time, and therefore some of those impacts won't be felt, we do note that UIU is correct that this may be a significant long-term factor. And it's not just with heat pump penetration, but with DER penetration and other things in general. And to me, that really hit for me as something that's a real critical issue, in that looking at that resiliency, the reliability, that impact, the penetration of DERs, and making sure that we do it in a way that helps from a transition perspective and does not have unintended consequences of not being able to facilitate a proper penetration. And we need to really be careful on that. So I just flag it because while we recognize that UIU was correct, we did not really focus on what the next steps were in here. And I know we will be doing that in other places, but I do just want to flag it that I believe that's a critical element for us to look at across the board. Then the other comment I have is that there seems to be, and this is a good thing in many respects, a heavy, how do I word this, heavy emphasis on working with NYSERDA. And I think we need to be mindful of looking at what that may mean. And also really, I'd like to truly understand a little bit more NYSERDA's role in general, and also understand some of the challenges and opportunities with that in a way that I want to be careful that we are not sending a message to the utilities that they must get the blessing of NYSERDA to do something. And I don't mean that with any disrespect to NYSERDA. I think they do an incredible job. However, I do see that it's sort of a overload creep of responsibilities and roles, and I am mindful that they're also working on other things outside of the commission. And so I do want to make sure that we're successful when we ask them to do something. And so to the extent that we need to be very mindful that NYSERDA, not just the utilities, and I think we tend to get into the habit of saying the utilities must do this, and we expect the utilities to not, continue same old. That also needs to apply to us as well as NYSERDA. And frankly, in this case, I'll extend it to NYPA as well. And while we have a lot on our plate, we do need to be mindful that we need to have a checks and balances on what is actually the proper role. And maybe there's an opportunity for us to not be so trying to be in control of everything. And what we may need to say, okay, we'll give this to you to do and work with us, but it is the market that we are trying to, incentivize, and we need to be mindful that we can sometimes try to be a little bit too controlling. So my really hope is that NYSERDA is also mindful of coming back in thinking carefully about other ways to share what they are doing, especially as it goes with their funding streams and budgets, but also just in terms of their overlapping programs, in a way that we are carefully, we're feeling comfortable on the accountability and measuring the successes or reprioritizing some that may not be helpful, and looking at whether we still need to have NYSERDA's role in all of that. And so my caution is that the language in here, while it talks about in consultation with, in many places, NYSERDA, in other places it seems to give NYSERDA sort of the lead role, which may not be inappropriate because they can be helpful, but to the extent that folks should also understand that does not mean that we're abdicating control to them, or that the utilities or others should think that they need to get the blessing, and that it's similar to that performance management and process focus, which is we need to be open to hearing what may not be working from our end or NYSERDA's end as well. So I just point that out because I do think it's important from that perspective. The other thing is just looking at, again, maybe it's also with NYSERDA, ability for them to, I know the Green Bank webinars, I know I listen to them, I know I look at things, and maybe they can look at how they can do that also. We get a lot of filings from NYSERDA. It's very hard for folks to follow, myself included, and it would be helpful if we were also able to have some better handling of more layman's information in a way that people feel that they're able to ask questions and get more understanding on that. I think that would be helpful. So I point that out. The other thing that I will say is that there's a recognition in here, at least from where I sit, and maybe I'm wrong, but there's a recognition that we do say for the MI proposal as it relates to looking at entertaining energy efficiency proposals to allocate and design rates to recover some portion of energy efficiency costs on demand. We do say, I think for the first time, that we send a nod to MI that these proposals may be something we're now going to consider. It's not, we are now open to looking at that, and that we let folks know that those proposals would be developed in a rate proceeding as each utility varies in their portion of its programs that are oriented towards demand reduction. And so we look to that to be facilitated in the rate proceedings. The caution I have is that we need to be very mindful now, to the extent that it is appropriate for it to be looking at rate proceedings, looking at in a rate proceeding. There are cost impact, ratepayer impacts, and there are other things that need to be looked at. So it makes sense to put it in the rate proceeding. The caution I have is that our rate proceedings need to be carefully evaluated in a way that helps to flush out those critical issues that may have, even if it's done just in a one particular service territory, to the extent it could have then statewide impact if others adopt that, or folks who may not be in those rate proceedings would not necessarily know to be involved in the flushing out of that policy as it relates to that. Particular issue for me is we see in here, just like with the Central Hudson rate case where it looked at the geothermal tax credit or rate credit, when we looked at that, that had statewide impact, even though it was just in Central Hudson's territory, evaluating it. And we can see, even in this draft order, that we recognize that has some potential hiccups. And so for me, it's very important. Again, I did not vote for that piece of it because of I did not vote for the Central Hudson rate case for a number of reasons, but that was one in particular. And it showcases to me that some of the thoughts that I had on that from this draft order really validated some of my concerns, especially because it was the first time we were doing it. And to the extent that we are moving this rate design development into a rate proceeding, it also will be potentially, which depending on which utility, it'll be the first time it'll be done. And I do think we need to look at rate proceedings when there are issues that may have statewide impact, even if only applied initially to that particular utility. We need to be able to not just say, well, we're adopting it because it was in the joint proposal. We need to pull it out somehow before it gets into the settlement discussions, or flag it that this is something that, even though it's in the joint proposal, because it has, it's novel, or it has some potential statewide impact, or others are looking at it, that particular issue may get carved out as needing a little extra special attention and seeking more of a statewide comment period. Not sure exactly how we do that, but I do flag it as something that we should consider, again, back into that sort of process point, because it may help us ultimately with the better end product in addressing that. So I just flagged that for consideration. With that, there are a number of other issues, positive and negative, that are in here, and I think overall my thoughts are, I have always broadly supported efforts to promote energy efficiency. And the issues for me have been how best to deliver the efficiency programs. We have had some successes. We have had some failures. We see from the EAPS program itself successes and failures, and ultimately issues that we had with that. We have consistently tried our hardest with energy efficiency, and we have changed our focus and some of our direction. And we need to be more mindful of that. I have in the past expressed concerns about cost effectiveness of certain programs. I've expressed concerns about roles and responsibilities of program administrators, and are they adequately defined. And for me, I've always focused on, and I continue to, ensuring that the expenditure of ratepayer dollars are effectively overseen by the Commission. In this order, I am heartened that there's a clear directive to utilities to design the most cost-effective programs tailored to their specific service territories and customer base. In a state as diverse as ours, with densely populated urban centers, suburban regions, Rust Belt areas, and very rural communities, we cannot force a one-size-fits-all approach on the utilities and think we will achieve our efficiency goals in a cost-effective manner. This order, at times, recognizes that each utility will have unique characteristics, and it's prudent for us to grant them the flexibility to develop the best solutions for their service areas. I do wish there would be more flexibility, especially as it relates to looking at the energy efficiency targets. While this is one piece of a larger pie, to the extent that a utility may be successful in one other thing that is not energy efficiency, but somehow their energy efficiency targets may not be met, we need to be able to look at some of that flexibility and see, just like we seem to do with uncommitted funds and moving funds around in NYSERDA, there may be an opportunity to look at the whole pie and see, does it make sense? We set this, but we want them to focus more over here. They want to focus more over there, and then we can work. And ultimately, it leads to some of the core clean energy goals we have without necessarily being seen as a negative, and that's something for us to consider. I am also somewhat pleased that the order recognizes the coordination between utility programs and NYSERDA programs and looking at needing to improve. I say somewhat only because I did identify some concerns I have with that. As the utility programs evolve from this order, I also hope that the NYSERDA programs and other programs like NIPA and LIPAs will also evolve. I know we're not addressing non-jurisdictional utilities, but I do think to the extent that they are also part of this and looking at that, it is important for the Commission as a whole to be focused on that as well and looking at what that means and not necessarily standing off to the side on that. I do hope that these programs continue to be optimized to deliver the best value to ratepayers. Lastly, I am happy that we're directing the utilities to come back to the Commission with their plans to achieve these aggressive targets. I do caution we should be looking at how to optimize flexibility while looking at solutions. And the flexibility we are granting is by no means a blank check. We need to look carefully and make sure that we're demonstrating that there is a focus on truly successful programs and what works, and we need to be mindful of the costs in doing so, and we need to carefully evaluate that and make sure that we're all being accountable. So with that, I am going to concur in part and dissent in part. There are aspects of this, as I discussed, so ultimately I am mindful that we have a lot of work to do, and we're all going to be part of that team, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Alisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to support this measure. I think that it continues us on our pathway to achieve our goals of controlling pollution through increased efficiency and improved affordability for participants, including low to moderate income customers. So I'll be voting yes on this.
Thank you very much. So with that, we will proceed to, I'll proceed to call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to adopt the accelerated energy efficiency goals, targets, and budgets as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I concur in part and dissent in part.
Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
Yes.
The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to the second item for discussion, which is in the matter of an energy storage deployment program presented jointly by Bridget Wobe, Assistant Counsel, and Marco Padula, Acting Director of Markets and Innovation. John Garvey, Utility Supervisor, is available for questions. Bridget, please begin.
Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. Public Service Law, Section 74, directs the Commission to establish a statewide energy storage goal for 2030 and a deployment policy to support that goal. In consultation with the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, and the Long Island Power Authority, or LIPA, staff has done so, and the proposed order before you accomplishes the statutory directives. The order would adopt a statewide goal of up to 3,000 megawatts of installed qualified energy storage systems statewide by 2030, and a deployment policy that supports that goal. These actions address the Commission's statutory responsibilities in full compliance with Public Service Law, Section 74. As a background, Public Service Law Section 74 was enacted on November 29th, 2017, and it was subsequently amended on November 5th, 2018. The November 5th, 2018 chapter amendment made several substantive changes, and it directed the Commission to establish this statewide energy storage goal and deployment policy by December 31, 2018, hence action at today's session. Just this Tuesday, further amendments to Public Service Law Section 74 were sent to the Governor for his review. These further amendments would require consultations with the New York Independent System Operator, or the NISO, and it would also add a requirement that any procurement of qualified energy storage systems be awarded through a competitive procurement process. These potential additional requirements are best practices, and all of the actions contemplated by this order are fully consistent with the further statutory amendments if they are signed into law. The proposed actions in this order are informed by an extensive record that includes more than 40 public comments, consultations with various entities, technical conferences, and hearings held on notice. In order to develop the energy storage goal and deployment policy recommendations before you, staff has ensured proper consultation with NYSERDA, LIPA, and the NISO as envisioned under Public Service Law Section 74 and the legislative amendments. Staff will continue to consult with these organizations as well as continue to engage with other stakeholders as the deployment policy effectuates. The actions directed by this order also comply with the recent potential chapter amendments requirement that any utility procurement shall be awarded through a competitive process. Competitive procurements are cornerstone of the Commission's Reforming the Energy Vision proceeding, and energy storage procurements directed by this order align with this policy and incorporate competitive procurement mechanisms. Marco Padula, the Acting Director of Markets and Innovation, will now present the overview of the deployment policy and the Commission actions contemplated by the order.
Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. Item 301 is a draft order establishing energy storage goal and deployment policy, which has the Commission adopting many of the recommendations contained in the New York State Energy Storage Roadmap, which was released back in June of this year. As you may recall, the Energy Storage Roadmap provides a comprehensive strategy to encourage the deployment of 1,500 megawatts of energy storage by 2025 and 3,000 megawatts by 2030. Broadly, the recommendations in the roadmap fall within 7 categories. Those are retail rate actions and utility programs, utility roles and business models, direct procurement, market acceleration incentives, soft cost reductions, clean peak actions, and wholesale market actions. Stakeholder feedback on the roadmap was solicited by Secretary's notice issued on July 17, 2018. Stakeholders were invited to submit written initial comments and reply comments, and the Secretary's notice also alerted stakeholders to 3 technical conferences that DPS staff and NYSERDA staff held in collaboration with the New York Green Bank, the New York ISO, the Long Island Power Authority, and PSEG Long Island. Those were held in New York City, in Long Island, and in Albany over the summer months. Energy storage will be a critical electric system component in maintaining reliability and enabling renewables to provide the needed amount of penetration to reduce greenhouse gas emissions sufficiently to satisfy the state's clean energy standard and state energy targets, energy plan targets. The draft order provides a comprehensive strategy to encourage the deployment of 1,500 megawatts of energy storage by 2025, growing to 3,000 by 2030, pursuant to Public Service Law Section 74 as described earlier by Bridget. The draft order does this by addressing barriers, accelerating the energy storage market learning curve, driving down energy storage costs, and speeding the deployment of the highest value energy storage applications. More specifically, the draft order defers decisions on rate design and value stack modifications to the value of distributed energy resources, or VDR, working group / white paper process, which will result in those issues coming before the Commission for decision in early 2019. The draft order authorizes a $310 million market acceleration bridge incentive funded by uncommitted funds collected through the Renewable Portfolio Standard, RPS, to be administered by the New York State Energy Research Development Authority, or NYSERDA, and directs NYSERDA to file an associated implementation plan and program manual. The draft order also directs the New York State utilities to hold competitive procurements for a total of 350 megawatts of bulk-sited energy storage systems in coordination with NYSERDA's market acceleration bridge incentive for this sector of the storage deployment. These procurements are expected to yield individual utility ratepayer benefits, and therefore the draft order includes adoption of a shareholder incentive mechanism intended to maximize those benefits. The draft order also identifies a future process regarding the establishment of a distributed energy resource data platform pilot, which would serve to test the concept of bringing together customer usage information, utility system data, asset data, and other publicly available data to determine if correlations exist that can provide valuable information for storage and other DER developers. To address the potential impacts of the May 16, 2018 draft express terms of 6 NYC-RR Part 222 from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation related to NOx emissions, the draft order requires the development of a peaking unit reliability study that would look at the equivalent level of clean resources, including energy storage, that could provide the same level of reliability as the existing peaking units. This study would be administered by staff in consultation with the ISO, NYSERDA, DEC, LIPA, and Consolidated Edison. Similarly, the draft order recognizes the need for a peaking unit retirement contingency plan by Consolidated Edison to report on the portfolio of alternatives that could be deployed if the peaking units are no longer available. The draft order also identifies a future process for the development of a market design and integration report that will describe the utilities plan for designing, implementing, and managing distributed system platform market functions that will enable DER participation in both distribution and wholesale markets. The draft order also adopts wholesale market design recommendations related to exempting energy storage from buyer-side mitigation rules, accelerating rules for aggregation of storage resources, and allowing for dual participation by adopting principles intended to identify the different modes and ways in which DERs can provide value to the electric system as a whole. Finally, the draft order requires staff to conduct an annual review of the statewide energy storage deployment progress and report back to the Commission with an informational briefing based on the annual report. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Marco. Storage is a critical resource. Observers and students of our electrical system have long known this and have long been looking forward to this resource being ready for prime time, and the time is now. It's a resource that is ideally aligned with our REV and state policy goal objectives. It delivers reliability, it enables clean, it allows load shaping, and it drives down system costs. So the topic is right and timely. And here as well, as in the case of energy efficiency, I find that the approach is right. Bridge incentives make sense when they can get the market going, but are designed to taper off as costs decline and in order to drive that cost decline. The approach is carefully thought out to be well suited for the best use cases. The approach is aligned with known and likely developments that are happening around us. I'm thinking here of developments at the NISO. I'm thinking here of the PICA rules that you mentioned, Marco, coming out of the Department of Environmental Conservation. This is important work. This is a well thought out approach. I will support it. Commissioner Sayre.
Energy storage is probably, actually in my mind, almost certainly going to revolutionize the production and distribution of electricity in the United States and ultimately the world. It can smooth out the variability of solar and wind and other intermittent and renewable generation facilities. It can shave the peak by allowing the disuse and maybe even retirement of expensive and dirty peaking facilities by generating and storing energy more cheaply and more cleanly in the off-peak hours. And in the long run, I see storage even helping networks ride through reasonably brief outages if major distribution or transmission or even generating facilities are knocked offline for a while. If you've got the storage there available, you can reduce those outages to the customers. But there's a chicken and an egg problem. It's not immediately commercially feasible to expect the utilities or the private market to start building and installing it because it's still just a little bit too expensive to make sense. So we have to be smart about what public resources, and in our case, ratepayer resources, we throw into market acceleration to drive the adoption, reduce the costs, and improve the technologies in question. I'm particularly delighted in this item that we've found a way to support the Market Acceleration Bridge initiative without any new ratepayer funding. We've found some uncommitted RPS funds that we can devote to the purpose. And that means that we can do this at very low impact on the ratepayers. Of course, the addition of storage is going to add to rate base, and it will have an impact on ratepayers in that direction. But the addition of storage over the next 7 years, we estimate to be only a cost of about $100 million to ratepayers, and that's going to be offset during the same period of time by system revenues and benefits that are quite likely to exceed the amount that we're asking the ratepayers to fund. So this is a very smart item, it's a timely item, and it complies with the law. I certainly support it.
Commissioner Berman.
Thank you very much. I do have a question on the study. In the draft order, it says the Commission will institute a proceeding where the peaking unit contingency plan will be filed to examine the broad reliability impacts of the proposed DEC regulations in the near future. I'm just making sure that I understand what that means. We will be opening a proceeding, exactly what we will be looking at.
Sure. So the draft order contemplates two things regarding a clean peak and the potential peaking unit generation retirement in the near future. So the specific directive out of this order is that staff, the NISO, NYSERDA, DEC, LIPA, and Con Edison develop a study to include determining how many megawatts of peaking units could be replaced or repowered economically with energy storage. That shall be submitted to the Commission by July 1, 2019. In addition to that, there's the need for a broader peaking unit contingency plan in the event that DEC's pre-proposal public amendments actually become regulation and must be complied with. So staff envisions, similar to the Indian Point reliability contingency plans, there would be a generic proceeding to look at the overall impact of these generating units retiring that would not be technology specific, that would not say look at energy storage to fulfill those reliability needs, but would be much more general.
Thank you. I do want to make sure I understand. So the study would be filed after it's worked with the staff from the ISO, NYSERDA, affected utilities, DPS, and DEC. So that's 5, right? Did I get it right?
Yes.
Okay. And that study being filed, does it then get SAP'd and out for comments, or is it just filed?
It will likely be subject to public notice and comments so that the commission could act upon its recommendations if the commission desires to.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that study, in my mind, is not, to me, it's more like a staff white paper. And I just don't want that this study is then utilized afterwards without having the benefit of the commission as a whole weighing into it. So, for example, if the study was to be taken and then put into a future state energy plan, but had not gone first through the commission as a whole, I would be concerned about that because I would want the benefit of those to weigh in on it, because we're asking you to do this and give us feedback on what that is. I just am very mindful that, the control of that study and any recommendations it may make needs to be very carefully analyzed in a way that the commission itself has an opportunity to adopt or modify. So just in terms of what that may look like is very important to me.
Sure, understood, and the intent is certainly to bring the study recommendations before the commission for commission action.
Okay. And also, again, I think it's the other entities involved should be mindful of that as well, especially as it relates to recommendations, even if they're recommendations that are outside the jurisdiction of the commission. It is important for the commission to have a voice on some of that because we have to work through the collaboration and make sure it's seamless. The second piece of that is the commission instituting a proceeding. As the draft order is written, it says the commission will, and I'm not fighting over the wording. I'm just making sure I understand it. The commission will institute a proceeding where the peaking unit contingency plan will be filed to examine the broad reliability impacts of the proposed DEC regulations in the near future. But I think, Bridget, what I heard you say was that it may be necessary to bring that proceeding after the DEC regulations are finalized versus looking at it from a proposed, that they're proposed and we're now giving thought to those proposed regulations.
It's the latter. We know that they're proposed, and we want the utility to think about it now, what the contingency plan would be if the impact of those rules would result in the retirement of the peaking units.
Okay. While I appreciate that, the concern I have is that I do believe, and this isn't the first time that DEC has issued proposed regulations that may affect our jurisdiction and ultimately affect our customers, the customers. So for me, especially as we look to the interconnection between environmental and economic regulation, I do think it's important that we not sort of take for granted that proposed regulations before they're adopted really should have some weight from the economic regulator on what those impacts are, rather than reacting to them after the fact. And it's not a knock on DEC at all. It's just a recognition that, it's more beneficial to do at the front end versus the back end. And while I understand that the staffs of both agencies do work with each other, it is important that our processes are looked at carefully, and the evaluation that can come from an economic regulator as a body may be very important, and also helps us more holistically look at all of these issues. There's no doubt all of us have the best intentions, but the implementation challenges in some regulations that, while they might be very helpful, are not necessarily practical, or you need to then look at what that means to actually implement those. So I'm very mindful of that. So I would caution, and I would hope that sort of, again, going back to those process implementations and not doing, the same way we've always done, I do think we need to look at that. And as they affect our utilities, the commission itself should be the lead, not DEC. And as it affects the economic impacts, it needs to be the commission itself, very much so. The other comment I will have is that I do know that LIPA and NIPA are both involved in energy storage, and I think that's a very good thing. But there is, as I sit, there is a little disconnect from my seat in terms of how that works as a whole. And so to the extent that NIPA and LIPA both are involved in many aspects of programs or complementary programs that we are focused on, I do think that we need to get a little under the hood in some of that. I know yesterday there was a very exciting announcement on energy storage with NIPA, but to the extent that can be more cohesive and working together as a whole, we should look at that, because there are funding opportunities, but also we need to be mindful of sort of the whole. That works also for other entities that NYSERDA works with that may not come to the commission while they're working through that. And so what I don't really want to figure out a way of not chilling those opportunities, but rather to make sure that we are cohesively looking at them and coordinating. Again, to the extent that we are the ones really as the lead in terms of setting the targets and the goals, I think we should be really mindful of those who are also looking to be partners with us, and to the extent that they are, I don't think that they should fear coming under the hood as a commission as a whole. And actually, I think it would be helpful, especially from an accountability and a measurement of our successes. So I would actually welcome them to be a little bit more focused on coming under the hood in a way that is helpful, even if it's not necessarily required. I think that can only help. To the extent that we are also looking at some of the potential achievements and opportunities that LIPA may be looking at, there are cost implications for that. LIPA's board has said that they generally will be doing most of what the commission itself as a whole adopts as it relates to REV. This falls under that. And to the extent that we should be looking ahead of time at some of those implications and understanding that, I think it's helpful. But also to the extent that it increases the potential costs. Rather than looking at them in silos, it may actually tip to actually need a commission jurisdiction rate proceeding. So we should look at that and be mindful of that, even if it's future opportunities. To the extent that they're long-term forecasts, it's better to have it ahead of time rather than, oh, we got it after the rate proceeding, so now we don't need to come in. And I don't really want that. So let's just think about that if it makes sense. REV was envisioned and is an opportunity to build a stronger, safer, more reliable, and clean grid. And how we do our decisions really need to provide overall more reliability, predictability, certainty, clarity, consistency, and the path forward. So the regulatory frameworks that we set up should be helping, not hindering. We are focused on the market and looking at transformation of that sector. I am mindful of focus that sometimes while we identify that markets are important, we need to be mindful that our policies that are made to improve the market at times can make the things worse. And so we need to be cognizant of that. And we need to look at true market-based approaches and make sure that we really are helping to harmonize the market in a way that makes sense. While I am glad to see that we will be working with the ISO, I do also believe that there are others that we should be looking at, like the State Reliability Council, and having more specific engagement with them on some of these policies as well. This order does fulfill a legislative mandate that the Commission adopt a robust energy storage policy. It is much more than that. Energy storage technology is advancing rapidly, and it's coming at an important time. It has the potential to more cost-effectively meet peak demand on the system, and as we're becoming more and more reliant on variable renewable resources, storage has the potential to help ensure grid reliability as we transition to a more renewable-based electric grid. But there is not necessarily meaning that it is do away with things that are not renewable. There has been a lot of discussion on the pairing of storage, gas and storage, and so we need to, while we are fuel agnostic and technology agnostic, we need to also be mindful that we at times are, we say that, but we're actually not when we focus only on one particular, where we say solar and storage. And while we need to look at all the subsets and allow opportunities for different pairings that may be there. There was a report back in 2015 by the Joint Institute for Strategic Energy Analysis, and it was called Pathways to Decarbonization, Natural Gas and Renewable Energy, Lessons Learned from Energy System Stakeholders. And this was a Joint Institute for Strategic Energy Analysis was worked on a very collaborative process with the U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Labs, the University of Colorado, Colorado School of Mines, the Colorado State University, MIT, and Stanford University. And to me, it really showcased that looking at the decarbonization and the pathway forward may involve many different interconnecting pieces. And we in New York have been very blessed with a very fuel diverse portfolio in state. And so I think we are on a good pathway and we could look at that. But I want to make sure that we are making sure that our policies are helping, not hindering. The program's focus on locating the resource where it makes the most sense and deploying in a manner that seeks cost reduction over time are both important components in the order. I do have mixed feelings on the seed money being approved today. I'm concerned that these funds were unspent by NYSERDA and aren't going back to the ratepayers. We do consistently have taken many times unspent funds and uncommitted funds and reprioritize them. But to me, we should be looking at that whole amount, and that gets back to the accountability from NYSERDA as well as ourselves and what we're doing because we are, in many orders, continuing to talk about future funding that is being put on, and that's cost ultimately to the ratepayers. I would also like to make mention that I am concerned in this order about, to the extent that we are talking about the wholesale energy market, I do think we need to be mindful of that. FERC Order 841, as well as others, the New York ISO also has its energy storage docket. And while we do seem to, in this order, direct NYSERDA in a very specific way, I am concerned about that from a chilling perspective and also making sure that we are not inappropriately treading into the wholesale market in a way that actually will hinder our progress on energy storage. And so for me, while I understand the desire to weigh in on that, there is an interconnection issue, and we do need to understand that we need to work with all of the different parties and also look to make sure that we are setting appropriate boundaries that don't tread inappropriately in areas that we may not be able to facilitate positive resolution. And so I do want to just caution that as to that, I am truly concerned and just want us to be open to looking and facilitating and working together on that issue. There is a legislative mandate, there's promise of energy storage technology, and there is strong justification for us to go forward. We do need to do so while minimizing costs to ratepayers, and we do need to be mindful that we need to be focused on helping, not hindering. So with that, I am going to support in part and dissent in part for some of my rationale and why I'm concerned. But overall, I thank everyone for their hard work on this, and I look forward to the next steps.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Alisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be supporting this. I think that this storage plan is a smart focus on the market acceleration of our most reliable, renewable, our most efficient green energy goals, and I believe it's beneficial not only to the consumers, ratepayers as well, but at the end of the day, the thing that we should be most focused on in all of our efforts, and that is what's good for the environment. So I'll be voting yes.
Thank you very much. With that, I will now proceed to call for a vote on the recommendation to establish a statewide energy storage goal of up to 3,000 megawatts by 2030 and 1,500 megawatts by 2025 as a deployment policy to meet that 2030 goal, and authorizing funding necessary to achieve that as described. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
Concur in part and dissent in part.
Commissioner Alisi?
Yes.
The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to the third item for discussion. Item 302, case 15E0751, as it relates to the proposed model tariff for energy storage systems paired with electric generating equipment, presented by Ted Kelly, Assistant Counsel. Warren Myers, Director, Office of Market and Regulatory Economics, and Marco Padula, Acting Director of Markets and Innovation, are available for questions. Ted, please begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. This item is a draft order regarding utility tariffs for distributed energy resources that pair a value stack eligible distributed generator, such as a solar generation system, with an energy storage system. The order describes such projects as hybrid facilities. The March 2017 order that created the value stack stated that projects that paired eligible generation resources with storage resources would be eligible for value stack compensation. However, it recognized that several implementation issues related to such projects required further process. In particular, such projects needed to be integrated into the standardized interconnection requirements for their interconnection to the grid, and a specific compensation tariff for such projects was needed. Compensation tariffs needed to be specifically tailored because several aspects of the value stack are exclusive to renewable energy. In particular, the environmental value element, the market transition credit, and certain capacity value options. Because the storage component of a hybrid facility can be charged either with energy from the renewable storage system or from the utility grid, and the storage system can then discharge that energy into the utility grid for value stack compensation, not all injections from hybrid facilities are necessarily renewable energy, and therefore not all injections should automatically receive environmental compensation and those other exclusive elements. However, hybrid facilities should not be forbidden from charging using the grid or from injecting such energy back into the grid, because this may be done in a way that benefits the the hybrid facility owner and the utility system, such as if the hybrid facility charges up during a time of low usage, like at night, and then discharges during a peak time in a case where the differential in actual value is big enough to make that beneficial. Therefore, a tariff was needed that allows the distinguishing between renewable and non-renewable energy injected into the system as precisely as reasonably possible. In April 2018, the Commission issued an order which modified the standardized interconnection requirements to facilitate the interconnection of hybrid facilities. That order also directed the utilities, the electric utilities, to jointly file a proposed hybrid tariff for compensation of hybrid facilities for Commission review. That tariff was filed in June 2018. Subsequently, a number of stakeholders filed comments on that tariff pursuant to a notice. The proposed tariff contains 4 options based on 4 different usage models. The comments, primarily from solar and storage developers, industry groups, and environmental nonprofits, were generally supportive of the proposed tariff and the overall framework. However, they did express several concerns about one option, option C, that it was not sufficiently granular and would treat some renewable energy as non-renewable. The Commission approves the hybrid tariff with modifications. I will describe it as approved and briefly describe how it was changed from the proposal. Option A is designed for projects where the owner of the hybrid facility intends to charge it exclusively from the renewable generator and not from the utility system. A project may follow this usage model where the storage resource received the federal investment tax credit based on the qualification rules for that tax credit. In this case, the utility will work with the developer during the interconnection process to ensure that the hybrid facility contains appropriate metering and/or controls so that the utility can verify that all charging is from the renewable system and not the grid. And in that case, all injections will be treated as renewable. Option B is designed for projects where the owner intends to use the storage resource only to serve on-site load and not to inject energy into the grid. For example, it may be used by a hospital or another type of business that has a high reliability need, where they really just want to focus the storage resource on meeting that reliability need. As with option A, the utility will work with the developer to ensure that appropriate controls and/or metering are in place, and then the utility will be able to verify that all injections are renewable and should be compensated as such. Options C and D are designed for projects with more complex usage models, where the storage resource may be charged from both the renewable generator and the utility system, and where both the renewable generator and the storage resource may be used to inject energy into the utility system for compensation. Those 2 options are different from each other in that option C applies to hybrid facilities that are co-located with an energy consumer, whereas option D applies to hybrid facilities that are separately sited, where it's just the generator and the storage resource and no other separate energy consumer on site. Under both options, the utility measures how much energy is consumed by the hybrid facility, and that energy is assumed to be used for charging the storage resource. The utility also measures, as it does for all value stack projects, injections into the utility grid. For the generally applicable elements of the value stack, including the energy payment or value, the distribution system values, the utility will provide compensation for all net hourly injections, as with other value stack systems. However, for the renewable exclusive elements, such as the environmental compensation and market transition credit as discussed earlier, the utility will only provide compensation for the net monthly total that results when the energy consumed by the storage resource is subtracted from the energy injected into the utility system. This net total represents the on-site generation of renewable energy from the renewable facility. For option C, calculating this will likely require multiple meters to separate on-site building consumption from hybrid facility consumption. For option D, 1 meter may be sufficient as all consumption can be assumed to be storage consumption. This tariff as described does reflect a modification of option C from the utility proposal. The utility proposal had treated all energy injected by the storage resource in option C as non-renewable. This modification also allows option C to be used by all hybrid facilities regardless of whether they're AC coupled or DC coupled. The utility model had restricted option C to AC coupled facilities. The tariff is also modified from the utility proposal, which made the selection of an option permanent and irrevocable to allow a one-time option for a project owner to switch from option A or option B to option C. This switch may be desirable for increased operational flexibility, and in particular may be desirable when the investment tax credit period ends and projects that initially stuck to solely charging from the renewable resource in option A now want the flexibility to charge in either way and therefore require additional metering and the more granular examination. In all 4 cases, the hybrid facility developer or owner will be responsible for paying the necessary metering and controls costs consistent with the standardized interconnection requirements. Overall, the hybrid tariff will encourage and appropriately compensate the development of hybrid facilities while maximizing the benefit they provide to the utility system and protecting non-participating ratepayers from any inappropriate impacts. And I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. I find this is a needed and appropriate adjustment of what's been in place and a careful, pragmatic, and smart resolution of implementation needs. I'm going to support this item. I will turn to my fellow commissioners. Commissioner Sayer, any questions or comments?
This is a necessarily complex situation because of all of the possible combinations, even though the initial question is pretty simple. What do you pay for energy injected into the grid by a hybrid system? I think this item and staff have done an excellent job on this, but because of that complexity, I'd like to ask staff to work with the utilities and keep an eye out on things in the field as to how it works in case somebody figures out how to unfairly game the system.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman.
Thank you, Ted. You did a nice job. I'm going to concur.
Commissioner Alisi.
I can be very succinct. This is a very complex issue, but it's testament to the hard work and wisdom that the department and all of the staff puts into this kind of effort. Thank you.
So with that, I will proceed to call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to adopt the hybrid tariff with modifications as discussed. Commissioner Sayer, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Berman?
I concur.
Commissioner Alisi?
Yes.
The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to the 4th and final item for discussion. Item 101, case 18G0565, as it relates to the tariff filing by Consolidated Edison to modify its interruptible gas service program, presented by Mike Reeder, Chief Gas and Water Rates and Supply. Cindy McCarron, Deputy Director for Gas and Water, is available for questions. Mike, please begin.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Item 101 addresses Consolidated Edison Company of New York's proposed tariff revisions to its interruptible gas service program. Specifically, the company proposes modifications to Service Class 9, Transportation Service, and Service Classification 12, Dual Fuel Sales Service, to amend the 2-violation rule, or strike rule, for for customers who do not comply with the affidavit requirement for interruptible gas service. By order issued December 16, 2016, in case 15G0185, the Commission directed local distribution companies to modify their tariffs for customers taking interruptible gas service. The directed modifications included requiring interruptible gas service customers to file an affidavit with the company every year attesting to the customer's compliance with the company's tariff, verify the customer has an alternate fuel supplier, and include certain customer information in the annual affidavit. Con Edison filed tariff amendments effective January 1, 2017 in compliance with the 2016 order that also includes a provision that penalizes customers who do not comply with the affidavit requirement by making them ineligible for interruptible gas service. Additionally, Con Edison's tariff provisions require that interruptible gas service customers be automatically moved to firm service when they receive a second violation if the gas distribution system is adequate to meet the customer's peak demand requirement. Based on the company's experience with implementing the affidavit requirement for the winter period of 2017-2018 and its overall efforts to reduce peak demand load, the company is now proposing tariff modifications that include 1. Eliminating the provision that a customer is not eligible for interruptible gas service if the customer does not return the signed affidavit to the company by October 1st of each year. 2. Redefining the two-violation rule to assess a first violation to a customer who fails to submit a signed affidavit by October 15th of each year. 3. Modifying the consequences of violating the two-violation rule during the current winter period, whereby an interruptible gas service customer incurring two violations is not automatically moved to firm service, but instead remains on interruptible gas service and is assessed a monetary penalty charge. 4. Adding termination provisions for customers who incur two violations and have not applied for firm service by April 15, or who have applied but cannot meet the requirements for firm service, or the company cannot accommodate on firm service. And finally, 5, adding a provision that terminated customers may reapply for interruptible gas service after 1 year. On November 27, 2018, Department of Public Service staff convened a technical conference with Con Edison and other stakeholders to discuss the company's proposed tariff amendments and gather input on the best approach to resolve these issues presented by Con Edison and its interruptible gas service program. The topics of discussion at the technical conference included the proposed violation for the failure to return an affidavit in time, communication between gas distribution companies and interruptible gas service customers, best approaches to verify whether customers have adequate physical alternate fuel storage and replenishment contracts, alternative enforcement actions against customers violating tariff requirements, such as installing tank monitoring devices and remote shutoff valves, challenges associated with switching interruptible gas service customers to firm service because of limited capacity, and uniformity among downstate natural gas utility tariffs. In addition, interruptible gas service customers in addition, stakeholders identified the importance of interruptible gas service customers in the operation of the gas distribution system, but also voiced a concern that many critical care customers take service under the interruptible gas service program. On December 3rd, comments responding to Con Edison's proposed tariff amendments and to the discussions that took place at the technical conference, discussions that took place at the technical conference were, on December 3rd, comments responding to, can you help me out here, where did I script off? Okay, yep. On December 3rd, comments responding to Con Edison's proposed tariff amendments and the discussions that took place at the technical conference were received by National Grid, the City of New York, Consumer Power Advocates, and Marathon Energy Corporation. In its comments, National Grid indicates that while it does not take a specific position on the changes proposed by Con Edison, it cautions against applying these proposals to National Grid because of the significant differences in the company's programs, along with differences in the number of customers in these programs. The city argues that Con Edison's proposed tariff amendments are a significant and problematic departure from the current program, have not been reasonably justified, and have the potential to undermine interruptible gas service and are unnecessarily severe. CPA asserts that because customers could potentially lose access to natural gas service under Con Edison's proposed changes, implementation of the changes would decrease resiliency, threaten reliability, and drive interruptible gas service customers to firm service. Marathon offers several recommendations that it believes could strengthen the interruptible gas service program, such as requiring a supply threshold of 65% capacity of a customer's alternate fuel source tank throughout the interruptible period, citing problems arise when such customers wait until its tank is at 10% capacity to request a refill. On December 7th, Con Edison filed reply comments claiming that the scenario contemplated by the city and CPA, in which customers could potentially lose access to natural gas service altogether, is unlikely, and that its proposed changes will give customers a reasonable opportunity to comply with interruptible gas service requirements. Yesterday, we received additional comments from the city that respond to the various discussions that took place during the technical conference. These additional comments do not necessitate modifying the draft order before you, but are a useful addition to the record in this proceeding and should be considered in future tariff filings. As stated in the Commission's 2016 order, maintaining gas system reliability for core customers is of utmost importance. Customers who choose to receive interruptible gas service agree to comply with the tariff provisions in exchange for a reduced transportation rate. Interruptible gas service customers play a critical role in the physical operation of the natural gas distribution system by curtailing their gas service when called upon, which improves system pressures during periods of high demand. However, interruptible gas service customers can also jeopardize the integrity of the system if they do not curtail their natural gas usage when requested by the company. In addition, by using the natural gas system during periods when system conditions allow, interruptible gas service customers further the goal of reducing the use of dirtier fossil fuels. If interruptible gas customers were unable to use natural gas under the company's interruptible gas service program, the operation of the gas distribution system would be impacted negatively and customers would rely on their predominant primary fuel source, fuel oil. In the draft order before you, it is recommended that Con Edison's proposal to eliminate the provision of automatically moving an interruptible gas service customer that incurs 2 violations to firm service be approved. As explained in its Smart Solutions filing, Con Edison has capacity constraints in both upstream gas supply and on its gas distribution system. The supply constraints have resulted in the company's reliance on delivered services, or peaking contracts, for approximately 19% of its peak day gas supply, and customer loads are reaching the maximum throughput capability in parts of its gas distribution system. Eliminating the provision that automatically moves an interruptible gas service customer to firm service should mitigate further strain on gas supply and support the integrity of the gas distribution system. The remaining proposed changes to Con Edison's interruptible gas service program do not adequately address or resolve the issues associated with customer compliance with the company's tariff or consider other potential solutions. Moreover, because of the important demand response function interruptible gas service customers have on maintaining the reliability of the gas distribution system, the mitigative impact on the environment from these customers not burning dirtier fossil fuels full-time, and the subset of critical care customers relying on natural gas service, Con Edison's proposed changes, which could potentially result in the complete loss of gas service to certain interruptible gas service customers, are unacceptable. In addition, Con Edison's proposed amendments create an adversarial relationship between the company and interruptible gas service customers, do not consider the nature of a failure to comply with the tariff requirements in certain situations, create a violation for a non-performance related event, and do not address the impact on critical care customers. Based on the concerns discussed during the technical conference and raised during the comment process, including those filed yesterday by the city, and based on the reasons I just described, the draft order before you recommends that Con Edison's proposed changes to its interruptible gas service program, with the exception of the proposed elimination of the provision to automatically move an interruptible gas service customer that incurs 2 violations to firm service be rejected. Staff proposed several solutions for discussion at the technical conference to improve the tariff language and improve interruptible customer compliance. Con Edison's proposed amendments do not adequately address staff's proposed solutions or the concerns raised during the comment process. Therefore, the draft order directs Con Edison to file tariff amendments that propose solutions addressing the submitted written comments, the concerns discussed at the technical conference, the treatment of critical customers, and staff's proposed solutions. In addition, Con Edison would be directed, upon your approval, to include in its next filing modifications to its tariff leaves addressing the potential negative impact of an interruptible gas service customer failing to stop using gas when directed. Because National Grid also serves interruptible customers in New York City, we encourage Con Edison to work with National Grid, staff, and interested stakeholders on tariff language that can be uniform across both service territories. Thank you. Cindy and I are now happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mike. My own view is that this is a clear, needed, and appropriate recommendation on how to go forward regarding some challenging situations that can confront some of our customers, where we have seen them experience these situations. I'm going to vote in favor of this recommended order. Commissioner Sayre.
I agree with the chair for the reasons he just stated. This isn't quite ready for prime time, needs to go back for more work.
Commissioner Berman.
I'm just a little confused, so just want to make sure I understand. By rejecting their modifications, except to the extent of saying to discontinue the automatic transfer of an interruptible gas service customer to firm service, where does that stand for the interruptible gas customer who violates the rules?
The company's current tariff provisions has both noncompliance, penalties associated with noncompliance of an interruption event, and also unauthorized use penalties. So when they do use gas during an event, it's charged at a higher rate than what normally would be supplied.
Okay. The concern I have is, first I want to take a step back. Con Ed is coming to us with these proposals and these modifications the same way they came to us with the SMART solutions proposal, because they are very concerned. It is not to be difficult to their customers. In fact, it's the opposite. They're really trying to figure out what to do with the constraints that they have and what makes sense without putting at risk the system. They're very cognizant, as well as other utilities, on the concerns they have because of the constraints. They need gas. Without it, we are working through these challenges in a way that is potentially maybe not this winter, but in the long term going to have potentially very negative consequences. And so while we are doing the right thing today in addressing emergency issues and looking at it, it is not now getting us out of the long-term future consequences that could be very devastating. And I went to the technical conference, and I was concerned because it was very clear to me that there were folks there who represent customers, large and small, who also have significant concerns. Now, there may be some process issues in working with Con Ed, but that, I think can be worked through. The reality is that a lot of this is outside of Con Ed's ability to change, to make things better without us tackling the elephant in the room. And I won't belabor other comments that I've made on this in other areas, but it really is concerning to me. Now, one of the issues for moving someone from interruptible gas service to firm if they've had violations is actually to help them not get a penalty. And the reality is we can't move them a lot to firm because we have constraints. So it would be easy to look at it and what that meant if we did not have those constraints. Having those constraints puts us at a great disadvantage, but really is potentially imperiling those very customers that need it. We saw just, I believe in the October session, maybe it was the November session, I can't remember, where we had 89 customers, many of them schools in the New York City area, that we had to grant waivers to on reducing those penalties because they weren't able to move from gas to other fuels, majority oil. And so the reality was, it was very clear from there, is that they need it. This filing and the comments that came in and the technical conference that I attended also hammered home the issue. Regulations should be done in a way to help, not hinder. We are hindering the folks who want energy service, in this case, natural gas. It then hinders other avenues that may be helpful, going back to that decarbonization path forward future report that talked about natural gas and renewables working together. Again, we should be looking at all of the fuel sources and working together to harmonize and make sure that we have reliable and clean energy. And this does not mean that it's a one fuel situation. Here, I don't know how much more we can allow this to continue, because it is a problem. And I want us to not just make now Con Ed have to file again because they didn't get it quite right. They did get it quite right. They've said it eloquently in their other filings as well as this. Now, maybe this isn't the answer, but the answer isn't refile and take all these things into consideration. This has more statewide impact. And it is not, I don't think it's fair to say, Con Ed, go back and figure it out. I just don't. And I don't think it's fair to say, and work with National Grid and figure it out. It's not about the paper tariff to make it all work out. It's about real life situation that we need to address. And I'm pretty passionate on this issue because it has real life impacts. And I really feel very strongly that we need to figure out it sooner rather than later and not be afraid of addressing the elephant in the room. And we also should be working with others who can help facilitate that if we are blocked in our ability to figure it out and stymieing the progress forward. The ISO, the New York State Reliability Council, looking at this, and others who may be able to help. We see in the news on opportunities for economic development throughout the state, in particular New York City. with large companies wanting to come, well, they're going to need energy, and they're going to need it. And we have to do some projections on what that is and what that means for the ripple effect for others who then would want to come, and the employees that would need that. And gas is a part of that mix. It's not the only part, but it's a part of that mix. So I am going to concur on this for this limited fashion of doing this, but I am also dissenting in part because I am really at my wit's end in understanding how dire this is, and do not think that the approach that we're taking of pushing the can down the road and somehow making it the utilities' fault is acceptable.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi, any comments or questions?
Nothing to add. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. With that, I will now proceed to call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to approve the proposed tariff amendments in part with modifications as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I concur in part and dissent in part.
Commissioner Alisi?
Yes.
The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now proceed to move to the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to comment on or recuse from voting on any items on the consent agenda? Commissioner Sayre?
No.
Commissioner Berman?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
On item 372, I will be concurring in part and dissenting in part. My concerns are with accountability, the clean energy standard. There are many reports filed by NYSERDA. That's a good thing. But we should truly look at reevaluating how we're handling all of this so that as we work towards the phase 3 of clean energy standard, we need to do a better job and look at the accountability of all of that. So that's on item 372. On item 461, A and B, I concur, noting for the record that while I appreciate this aspect of the settlement agreement for American Water to address the allocation of certain tax refunds between American Water and ratepayers, while procedurally in the settlement agreement it was left for the Commission to do in this proceeding, I do not agree that the entire settlement agreement and the court order was done without the benefit as the Commission as a whole addressing it. On item 561, charter, I'll be voting no, which is consistent with my voting record. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now proceed to call for a vote on the consent agenda. My vote is in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda. Commissioner Sayre?
Yes.
Commissioner Berman?
I vote yes, except for the items I discussed.
So noted. Thank you. Commissioner Alisi?
Yes.
The items are approved and the recommendations are adopted. Secretary Burgess, is there anything further to come before us today?
There's nothing further to come before you, but if I could just please ask for clarification of some votes. So Commissioner Berman, are you concurring on 461A and B? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Chair Rhodes, could we just, I just want to make sure I have the correct vote on 301. Could you just restate your vote, please? Because I don't think it was picked up by the webcast. The energy storage.
My vote is in favor
Thank you.
of the recommendation. Thank you.
With that, there's nothing further to come before you today.
Thank you. So we are adjourned, and happy holidays, everybody.